Hello, and welcome to the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast, the podcast for entrepreneurs looking to grow their business through digital marketing. In this episode, we'll be talking about exciting ways that you can promote your fintech startup on social media. Let's get started. Before I get into today's topic, I just wanted to get on here and properly introduce myself because this is the first episode of the show. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the founder of Megan Taylor Creative, which is a full-service content marketing agency. We specialise in social media, content writing, and content strategy. I started Megan Taylor Creative back in August 2021 after I had finished a contract role at an agency in Reading, which is where I currently am based. I knew that from my experience in a busy corporate agency, I knew that I just no longer wanted to work in the traditional workplace. And the main way to escape the corporate daily grind was to start my own business. So in August 2021, I finally set up a Wix website and opened up my services to the general public. The reason why I chose an agency over a personal brand, though, is because of my background in corporate marketing, and also because I didn't want to be limited to a set of services. I wanted to be able to work with a range of clients on different projects. I didn't want to be limited to specific packages. That said, I decided to specialise in social media, content strategy, and content writing because those areas were where I'd had the most experience during my time as a full-time marketing employee. That said, one thing that I never got to do much of whilst working in corporate was making rich media. So things like videos and podcasts were never something that I got to actually do, but I knew that at some point I wanted to create a podcast or YouTube channel for Megan Taylor Creative. I guess the reason why it took me so long was because, again, I didn't have that experience, and the idea of starting a YouTube channel or a podcast seemed quite overwhelming. But I just did some research and found some software that I can use. And in 2022, I just decided to get started. And the reason why I decided to get started was because I felt like the brand's presence was holding me back from sharing me as a person on social media. And I think that being personable on social media is really important. So I wanted to start a podcast so people can put a name behind the brand and they, can hear my thoughts and get to know my personality a little bit. And speaking of Megan Taylor Creative, if you did want to work with me, you can just contact us by heading to our website at megantaylorcreative.co.uk, or you can just DM me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm pretty much always on social media, so it shouldn't take too long to get a response. My handle is at Megan LJ Taylor on both platforms. So I hope that introduction gave you some context into me and my business, and now it's time to actually get into the episode. So let's finally get into the topic of the episode, which is how you can promote your fintech startup on social media. So the reason why I wanted to talk about fintech for my first episode is that one of my first marketing jobs was for a fintech startup. I worked there for several months back in 2019 before the world completely changed. And in that time, I learned a lot about how to run a marketing campaign. It was also the first job where I got some real insight into how to actually run a small business. Because unlike the company that I had worked for previously, where I've been there for a year, it was a small to medium-sized company, and there were a lot of salespeople, a lot of people in operations. So I was very sheltered from how everything ran, I guess. But with the fintech company, there were only 6 of us in a team, and we were all working in a tiny room that the owner had rented out on a golf club in Oxfordshire. So I just found that experience really bizarre and interesting, and it taught me a lot about what it was like to wear different hats and how to be more proactive in a work environment. Since then, though, I've always found that fintech projects have just kind of found their way towards me. Even in my last corporate job, which was as a contractor role for a local agency, I ended up working on projects for a company who offered fintech solutions. I've also had the pleasure of working on projects for fintech startups since starting Megan Taylor Creative, and I'm really happy that this is just how my business has naturally grown. I'm just happy that the people that actually find us are in that niche because it is where I feel most comfortable, I think. But I find that with fintech, some people really struggle to market their business because they're under the assumption that fintech is boring, especially B2B fintech companies, under the impression that no one's going to be interested in what they have to say. And therefore, as an extension, their content will be boring. And that's the same with their social media. That said, I've actually found that the fintech industry is the complete opposite of boring. It's one of those industries that's at the epicenter of cutting edge technology. And I do personally believe that it's really going to change our lives forever. And the thing is, when you look at the main function of a business, which apart from, to make money, it is actually to help people. I think fintech is primed and ready to succeed because these startups are focused entirely on making people's lives better. And they do this by improving how they manage their business or personal finances. So, how do you actually grow your fintech startup on social media? Well, the thing is, there's lots of different ways that you can go about this. But if there's one thing that I really want you to take away from this episode, it's that community is really important. You want to use social media to grow an engaged community that gets excited for each and every release. But to actually do this, you do need a plan. So with that said, here's my step-by-step guide to growing your startup on social media by creating an active community. So the first step that I would recommend you really consider if you want to use social media to grow your fintech startup is to create a crowdfunding campaign. Now, crowdfunding is one of those things that has gotten mixed results and also has been quite controversial. I think for some people, they may be concerned about the ethics of crowdfunding. But I think, whilst I understand that line of thinking as well, I think if you essentially come into it in the right mindset and you execute it in the right way, then crowdfunding can be a really lucrative way to grow your startup and also develop a strong community on social media. And that's, again, another thing. Without a strong community on social media, I think you will really struggle with your crowdfunding campaign. So here's a few ways that you can get your community engaged. So the first way is by holding events. They can be live streams, but they can also just be social media events as well. So things like on Twitter, you can hold a challenge or something like that to get people interacting with your personal brand. There's lots of different ways that you can get creative when it comes to events. But I do think that live streams work well, mainly because they just seem to be in trend right now, and also because it's a great way for you to actively engage with your community through the comments section. And also, I guess, just by promoting it on social media, you can start interacting with your audience there. If you wanted to know how to run a crowdfunding campaign that's actually successful, I've created a blog post on Megan Taylor Creative that's essentially a step-by-step guide to do just that. It also explores the features of a successful crowdfunding campaign. So the sort of things that you can implement into your campaign from the beginning to set yourself up for success. So yeah, I will leave that link in the show notes. The next step to promoting your fintech startup on social media is to create a YouTube channel. And YouTube is fantastic for building a strong community because it allows for things like live streams, but you also have the community tab where you can share updates with your YouTube following as well. So I highly recommend creating a YouTube channel, but I recommend doing it with the caveat that you should really be focusing on the community aspect of YouTube as well. I don't think it's just enough to upload a video a week and then think you're going to see success with actually growing your fintech startup through YouTube. Like every other person on YouTube, you really need to ensure that your YouTube following is engaged with your content, that you're replying to the comments, that you're actively updating the community tab, and that I think you, to be honest, host regular live streams. This may seem like a lot of work, and it is, but I think that if you want to make sure that you grow your fintech startup to a place where you're getting repeat business, especially if you're using the SaaS business model, then that is really an important aspect of it. Another way that you can grow your audience on social media that will in turn grow your fintech startup is to be present on Twitter. I'm a little bit biased for Twitter because a lot of my business does actually come through that platform. But that said, I know that Twitter works for a lot of startups, especially fintech startups, because it is essentially a meeting ground for technology nerds, and a lot of people, especially in the crypto space, for example, they're using Twitter to share their thoughts, especially recently with the crypto market crash. That's been a big discussion. So I would first just recommend typing in some relevant hashtags that you think your target audience will be searching for, and getting involved in those discussions before maybe then going a bit deeper with your Twitter engagement, and even maybe starting a space, which is essentially, I guess, almost like a Twitter podcast where lots of people can get involved. It's quite similar to a Clubhouse. You have to ask to speak in certain rooms, but you can also host your own space as well. And I've never hosted a space, but I do know from just speaking to a number of my clients who've done it that they have gotten repeat business or inquiries just through using that content platform. Another way that you can use social media to promote your fintech startup and to create an engaged community is through Facebook groups. Now, Facebook is one of those social media platforms that some people really love and some people really hate. I think some people are under the impression that social media is old-fashioned and that it's essentially for baby boomers or middle-aged people. But that's not true. There's lots of different people that still use Facebook. There's millions of people on the platform, so I would still leverage it while you can. And actually, Meta, I suppose, yes, I should say Meta, they're updating the platform regularly and trying to compete with a lot of the bigger social media platforms that may have overtaken their clout a little bit. But I think the best way to create a community on Facebook is definitely through Facebook groups. Facebook groups aren't as much work as, say, a YouTube channel. You do still have to put in some grunt work behind it, and once it starts to grow, you will probably spend a lot more time actually managing the community, because they can get a little bit rowdy if you're not careful. But the way that I would recommend actually starting one up in the first place is to ensure that A, you have community guidelines, and B, you do also ask people that want to join your Facebook group a set of questions. because this will help you kind of filter out the sort of people who you want to join a group and the sort of people who you don't want to join a group. Now, I do actually have quite a bit of experience managing Facebook groups, and that is something that I would be able to help with for your fintech startup. So if you did need Facebook community advice or someone to actually run your Facebook community for your fintech startup, then please feel free to contact me on Twitter and we can talk about your requirements. The last way I'm going to talk about today that you can promote your fintech startup on social media is with Instagram and TikTok. These two platforms, they're essentially catered for B2C companies because they're all about visuals and showing off products. But the thing is, you can still use those platforms for B2B, and many people do it very well. That said, I do think that Instagram and TikTok work really well for fintech startups who are in the personal finance space. I think that you can give your audience a lot of tips. You can use carousel posts. You can create relatable memes because obviously everyone has to manage their personal finances in some way. So it's just a really good way to share valuable content while also humanizing your brand by showing your audience that yes, you are engaged with social media, and yes, you understand a lot of the trends and that you have a sense of humor. I would recommend, if you're going to use Instagram and TikTok, to definitely go the video route though. Obviously TikTok is video only, but Instagram specifically is pushing video content, and that is so that it can compete with TikTok. So use things like Reels and Stories. You can do Q&As on Stories as well, where you can get your audience to ask you questions and then you can respond to their questions, and also you will likely have DMs if your content is valuable enough. So you'll just want to make sure that you're managing that aspect of being on both of those platforms. I wouldn't say that B2B fintech startups will thrive necessarily on Instagram or TikTok, and I don't think that's where a lot of B2B fintech startups will spend a lot of their time. But I also do think that if you have a younger audience, especially if you're a crypto startup, for example, then you will probably want to use one of those platforms because the people that are interested in crypto will be using them. That's it. That's everything I have for you today in this episode. I've really enjoyed the process of starting and recording a podcast. I think it's very refreshing to be able to sit and talk and express my thoughts in another way. So I'm definitely looking forward to recording future episodes. I'm hoping to make it a weekly podcast, but we shall see in terms of my schedule how I'll be able to fit that in. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you would like to check out Megan Taylor Creative, again, I will have links in the show notes. If you did want to support the podcast, please leave a review, or you can support us on Ko-fi as well, or just simply sharing the podcast and tagging us on Instagram, for example. That will really help. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you in the next episode. Bye! Thank you for listening to the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, please like and share this on social media, or alternatively, you can support us on Ko-fi. The link to our Ko-fi page is on the Megan Taylor Creative website. Thank you.